Hi, we're at CES continuing with a conversation that we began with Dave Belt, who is the Director of Product for Irdeto, and with Scott Davis, who is Principal Architect for Charter Communications. We have looked at the general market conditions that are driving the introduction of UHD, ultra high definition services, enhanced with HDR, high dynamic range technology. Now we're going to look at some of the technical issues that providers, distributors, and content developers are having to wrestle with to actually make this a practical mass market opportunity with respect to getting out to as many TV sets as possible, content that exploits the very, very dramatic difference between an HDR infused piece of content and standard HD. So Scott, let me begin by asking you, from the standpoint, as you mentioned in our previous sequence, how fast things are changing. What are some of the issues that are changing so fast that make it hard to nail things down?
Right now, one of the things we're facing is the continuing evolution of some of the standards. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a huge series of metadata specs coming out of the SMPTE team. We just got a brand new one last few weeks. There's nothing wrong with any of these specs. They just add to the breadth of options. You get nervous at that point in time. What's the right option to pick? How do you make sure you do the thing that's best for the consumer? Additionally, as things like ATSC 3.0 come along, there's implications for how people would like to give us content. And then how do we make sure that we deliver the content in a way that the provider was comfortable with, that's good for the consumer, that we don't muck something up on our own system, and how to make sure that the consumer has a good time watching it. Transitioning any time is difficult. I came into cable originally during the HD to SD change, and I know how much we wrestled with doing things like down conversions and center cuts and moving from analog to digital workflows. We're facing many of the same issues again. They have slightly different, knobs and levers, but we're going to have to make sure we get those knobs and levers in place where everybody in the food chain is very happy with the outcome.
When you talk about the standards, the impression that the industry has left over the past 2 years is we are nailing this, and so we've seen the idea of UHD 10, this widely accepted approach to things that mirrors what the Blu-ray Disc Association has adopted as their standard, all suggesting that we're going to have a single stream, we're going to have a 10-bit stream, we're going to have a new transfer function that allows the higher-end TVs to really execute on this, whether the luminance values are at several hundred or up around 1,000. We're going to have all this fixed. What do you say to that?
Well, let's start with the easy one. What luminance value should we choose? I recall last year going across the floor and looking at 400 nit TVs, thinking that's pretty cool. I've had an opportunity on a couple of different occasions to see people's produced content at much higher values, at 1,500 nits. How do we balance that out appropriately? What is the right approach to this? Not all manufacturers are going to create luminances that are the same. How do they measure those luminances? How do we derive what the real value is of that TV? Additionally, what happens if somebody shoots something at 1,000 nits and the TV's 2,000 nits? Do we allow the TV to make a change? Do we do a change in some external box? Or do we clamp it at 1,000 nits? These are things we haven't figured out yet. What's more interesting to me is going back to one of the things you said where, is it 10-bit? Well, we know that there's people out there asking for 12-bit. This isn't new. This came up years ago in SMPTE. The difficult part for us is we have a huge install base that's only 8-bit aware. So do we do 2 streams at once? Do we do 1 stream at once? How do we approach that market appropriately? Additionally, the compression changes. Not a lot of people are aware of this. It seems that in the legacy world where we still use an awful lot of MPEG-2 compression and a little bit of AVC or MPEG-4, we're looking at HEVC main 10. Quite a few of our existing boxes and our existing decoders don't understand that. So how do we make sure that when we're deriving something for a consumer, we give them the right stream so they get the right experience and we don't accidentally give somebody something they can't watch?
One of the solutions that seem to me to be pointing toward greater standardization and conformance and consensus on how to do things has to do with what's known as the transfer function, and the SMPTE endorsed transfer function was seen as a big leap up and a big challenge as far as only certain TVs could do it, and that kind of blocked out being able to deliver an HDR enhanced signal to all the other 4K TVs out there. And then along comes the technology developed by the BBC and it called HLG, is it?
Yeah.
That recently got endorsed in the latest standard from the ITU as another way of doing the transfer function that would actually be backward compatible with the older 4K TV sets and allow them to render HDR as well. And that was perceived as, at least by yours truly, as a possible solution. You're wincing. Why?
HLG and PQ are both long-term.
PQ being
perceptual quantizer. Sorry, I'm sure somebody out there is wincing at the way I'm saying that. Apologies. PQ and HLG have been proposed for quite some time, and both are actually in SMPTE standards now, and both have arrived in ITU BT documentation. There's concern about chromaticity errors that some people have seen in some earlier versions of HLG. When you start going into the color space, these are not things that I think cannot be overcome. The difficulty becomes what does the TV support? Until recently, I saw a great deal of support for PQ and not so much in HLG.
yeah, that's all we saw. Just about. I mean,
I walked across the floor today and I saw an awful lot of HLG. So I think we're back to the place of which would you like to do. It's going to be a bit of negotiation between us as content distributors, content creators, TV manufacturers, what the process is to be yet. I think anybody who thinks this is all completely solved is a little premature at the moment.
so how does it get solved from a cable industry standpoint? Forget about everybody else. How are you guys arriving at some means of doing this that gets you on course to be able to compete with this kind of service?
Obviously, we'll spend some time testing. We need to make sure that we make good technology decisions for the consumer, for ourselves, and for our ecosystem. We're obviously in the midst of doing testing to make sure that we make good qualitative decisions. We need to make sure that we understand what's being delivered to us and what the game plan is going to be from the content creators. Some of that is getting more refined. We are starting to be aware of how things are being archived when it's being shot in film. I'm much more of a linear TV guy. I need to understand what the implications of how we shoot HDR in a live sequence. Do we do metadata or not? These are things we need to figure out yet. It's going to involve a lot of testing. We need to figure these things out before we're ready to commit any way we go.
Is this being done collaboratively across the cable industry through cable labs, or each of you kind of pursuing it on your own?
There's a lot of work going on in the standards organizations. SET is certainly doing some stuff. The ATSC is certainly talking to us about stuff. We're working closely with the content creators, production equipment manufacturers, encoder vendors, and decoder vendors right now, so we can make sure we make good decisions.
Wow. So it's not a slam dunk, but it's coming. I guess that's what we can say. And to that point, we'll move to our third segment of this series with a discussion of, when it comes, what it means from a security standpoint and the new rights.